Good evening to each and every one of you. What an honor and a privilege it is to stand before you and to be your speaker. This evening, for just a short time, I'd like us to consider what I consider to be some very fundamental teachings of the Christian faith. Nothing I have to say this evening is going to be anything new, anything you haven't heard of, but I think these are fundamental teachings that I think every Christian needs for really every aspect of the Christian life. These are some things that in my own time, I needed something to sit down and wake up in the morning and look at and consider and apply. I think sometimes it's so easy to get lost in the complex that we overlook the simple, and I just like to look at these Beatitudes a little bit and see how we can take these and apply these to our life. You might ask, why the Beatitudes? How did I start here? Well, this first started out with the question of what are some things that I can better do to practically share the gospel? What are some simple things I can apply? And the first thing I did is I really tried to skim through the New Testament and try to buffet style pick and grab different principles that I thought might be applicable to the Christian life. But really I thought, you know what, Jesus probably knows better than I do. And I thought that because when I read Matthew 5, 14 through 16, very familiar passages, you are the light of the world, a city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand. And it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. We are very familiar with this passage. We know it, but then I might ask, how do we let the light shine? Well, we like to overcomplicate that and think about that too much. I think I do that. What I need to do is just literally go back about 6 verses before and see what Jesus said and take that, apply it, and live it. Matthew 5 starts out and says, "And seeing the multitudes, he went up on a mountain, and when he was seated, his disciples came to him." Emphasis, his disciples came to him. Then he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, what we're about to study this evening is not something, and these are not standards that we can apply to anybody that is outside the church. These are not expectations that we can have for people who aren't Christians, because these are going to be the expectations that make us stand out. These are qualities that the citizens of the kingdom of heaven have. This is not just qualities that preachers have. This is not just qualities that elders have. This is not just qualities that men or that just women have. This is something that each and every single one of us need to be effective leaders, to be effective Christians, to be good husbands, good wives, good daughters, good sons, all of the above. These are things that we all need to do and we all need to apply. And as I thought about this, another familiar passage, 1 Peter 2:9, the Bible reads, "But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light." Emphasis on holy nation and special people. You know, in the world today, obviously there's a lot of different cultures. And you can tell when somebody comes from a specific place. For say, if somebody is from Mexico, they'll have a certain type of culture to them. They'll speak a certain way. Maybe they speak Spanish. Or if someone is from Ireland, they'll have a particular accent. And they'll have different characteristics about them that help you know and set off mental cues in your head that, oh, they're probably not from the United States. They're probably from Ireland or they're probably from Mexico, respectively. So it is with the Christian life. And I think so it is specifically with the Beatitudes. These are going to be qualities, traits, and characteristics that people can visibly observe and see and think, you know what? That person is different. You know what? That person's homeland is heaven. They are not of this earth. So as we think about, and what I've learned as I've studied this a little bit more, when we're talking about evangelizing, a lot of the times we look at things we can do. And I don't want to take away from that. That's fundamentally important. But I think such an important part of evangelism sometimes isn't so much what we do, but who we are. Who we are. You can say all the right things. You can be all the right places. You can know all of the passages. But if your Christian life isn't consistent with the doctrines of Christianity and with the teachings and expectations of Jesus, a lot of the times you're not going to be effective in your evangelistic efforts. So that's kind of what I want us to focus on, is focusing on who we are this evening as opposed to what we do. So let's focus on who we are. So first question here, what is a beatitude? A lot of people look at the Beatitudes and they say, well, it's a beautiful attitude. And certainly that's true. That's a very poetic way to say it. But literally, that's not what it means. The word beatitude comes from the Latin word, which literally means blessed. If you look at this in Strong's, it means supremely blessed, by extension fortunate, well off, blessed, or happy. Why do I emphasize this? Well, when we look at a few of these different qualities and a few of these different traits, these aren't things that would just come to our mind as, oh, listen, if you do this or if you do that, if you mourn, you'll be blessed. If you're meek, you'll be blessed. These aren't things that we'd come up with in our mind and say, this is what you should do. These are not things that the world would say, that culture would say, you should do. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we go on. So keep in mind that these are things Jesus said, if you do X, Y, or Z, you will be blessed. You will be happy. So many people in this world today want to be happy. We all want to be happy. Well, where does true happiness come from? Where does true meaning, where does true purpose comes from? It comes from following after the teachings of Jesus, living the Christian life. So we'll look at that a little bit. This is what we'll go over. The poor in spirit, those who mourn, the meek, those who hunger, the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers, and the persecuted. Let's start out with the first one in Matthew 5 and verse 3. And if you're flipping along in your Bibles, we'll spend all of our time in Matthew 5. There the Bible starts, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the poor. Who in society today thinks if you're poor in anything, you're blessed? Nobody. Being poor in anything typically is frowned upon. If you call someone poor at X or poor at Y or poor at Z, most likely you're probably insulting them. But Jesus says here, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Maybe it means something that we don't think it means. Nope. Poor means beggarly, destitute of wealth or influence, position, or honor. In fact, this is the same word that is used to describe Lazarus in the parable of rich man and Lazarus. Lazarus was so poor that he ate crumbs off of the table of the rich man. He was so poor that he had dogs come and lick his wounds. That is poor. But we are not necessarily financially poor, but we are poor in spirit. Well, what does that mean? I think a simple way to put it, somebody who is poor in spirit is somebody who has emptied themselves to make room for God. Somebody who has emptied themselves to make room for God. I think there's a lot of people in the world today that are so full of themselves that there is no room for God. They're so full of what they want. They're so full of what they think. They're so full of what they've been taught that they never make room for God, for Jesus, and for His expectations. This is kind of the idea of the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector in Luke 18. Now, we won't read through all of this for time's sake, but kind of a cliff notes of it is we have two people to go up to pray. We have a Pharisee and we have a tax collector. This Pharisee goes up to pray and he's very prideful. Now the Pharisee in the first century would be the people that the Jews looked to as the religious elite, as the teachers, the people who really knew what was going on with the old law. And so this Pharisee went up to pray and basically said, God, I am so thankful that I'm not like this guy. I am so thankful that I do not act like him. I am so thankful that I don't look like him. I am so grateful that I am better than he is. And then this tax collector, who everybody in the first century would have hated. Some things never change. We don't like the IRS. They didn't like the tax collectors. This tax collector went up to pray, and he wouldn't even so much look to heaven. He wouldn't even look to heaven because he didn't think he was worthy. Because he'd emptied himself so much and left so much room for God. Verse 14 says, I tell you, this man, the tax collector, went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Where are you? Are you so full of your own ideas? Are you so full of what you think is right? Or have you let room in for God? Moving on. Verse 4, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Man, Jesus just keeps coming with it. We think they're going to be things that we'd recommend, and then they're different. No one has ever said, blessed are those who mourn. That's not a normal teaching. That's not a cultural teaching. Well, maybe we're in luck. Maybe mourn doesn't mean what we think it means. Nope. To grieve, used in the Old Testament when someone died. Here's a bunch of examples of people who mourned. Well, what does this mean? Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. What are we mourning? Are we just sad all the time? Are we just insecure? Are we just depressed all the time? No, it means we have a mournful attitude towards sin. It means we have a mournful attitude towards sin. We're mournful because we realized how lost we are without God. You know, I have a hard time talking about sin sometimes. It's an uncomfortable topic. It's something that we don't want to bring up. But something that I've learned is you cannot appreciate the goodness of God. You cannot appreciate how loving, how merciful, how gracious, how much God cares for every fiber of our being if we cannot realize how serious sin is. We can't appreciate how good God is if we can't realize how serious sin is. And I think sometimes it's easy to put some sins and sweep them under the rug because we like them, or they're habitual, or they're something that just makes our lives better in our own minds and of our own volition. But we need to view sin the same way that God views sin. We need to not like it. We need to hate it even. Because here's the reality. We don't know what's best for us. We do not know what's best for us. Why? Why do we not know? Because we are not the almighty, omnipotent, infinite God. We are not God. God knows everything, and God knows what's better for us than we do. And everything that His holy and inspired word says is sin. And whether we understand it or whether we don't, if we partake in that, it's for the worse. It makes our lives worse. Whether we understand it or whether we don't, what God says goes. And if God says something is a sin, it is a sin. And I'm sure in time we'll come to understand and we'll come to realize why. But we need to mourn because we realize how serious sin is so we can appreciate the goodness of God. Moving on. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Now, maybe not to you, but to me, meekness is a hard word to describe. What exactly is meekness? Well, I couldn't exactly explain it, so here's a definition. I'm really not one for definitions or reading anything, but this was helpful for me. Meekness is a humble attitude that expresses itself in the patient endurance of offenses. Gentleness is a practical synonym. It implies mercy and self-restraint. Meekness is not weakness. Sometimes we confuse the two, but this next part here is what really was helpful for me. But the difference between a meek person and a weak person is this. Listen, a weak person can't do anything. Listen to that. A weak person cannot do anything. A meek person, on the other hand, can do something about it, but chooses not to. A weak person has no control over the situation. They can't alter it, they can't bend it, they can't change it for their own good and for their own benefit. Somebody who is meek certainly has the power to change the situation to their benefit at the expense of others. But they choose not to for the benefit of others. Maybe that doesn't make sense. Here's some two visual examples. I don't know if you're familiar with horses, or maybe you haven't seen a horse. This is Texas. I guess there's a lot of horses here. Horses are massive. Horses are huge creatures. If you got in a boxing ring with a horse in some way or some shape or some form, you would not win. Horses are far stronger than humans are. Yet humans have domesticated them and we ride them around all the time. If you look at this little picture right here, you see this halter around the horse, and in the mouth there's something that we call a bit. And so you put this bit in the horse's mouth, and when you pull the rein to the left, it goes left. You pull it to the right, it goes right. Pull it backwards, they'll go backwards. Just a quick pull, they'll stop. That horse is exhibiting meekness. It has all the power in the world to buck you off, to kick you, and to bite you, and to trample over you and stomp you, but it doesn't, because it's meek. It's power in control. Here's another example. I'll actually use Bryce because it's equally true. When I'm at home, I use Cole, but I'll use Bryce. Recently I've gotten into chess. I really consider myself something of a chess connoisseur until I play Bryce. In fact, one time, Bryce and I played chess 10 times in a row. 10 times in a row. How many games do you think I won? Maybe 4. I look like a 4-win guy. 0 games. I won 0 games of chess. But then Bryce and I played a game of chess, and I played fairly well. I played fairly well in this game of chess. Was I playing well in that game of chess because I was better than Bryce? Or as I thought about it, was I playing well in that game of chess because Bryce probably wanted to play me again? I was probably playing well in that game because Bryce was letting me play well. What is that an example of? It's an example of meekness. It was power in control. Why do I emphasize this so much? I think especially for leaders in the church. I understand I'm 21. I understand I don't know much, but this is a biblical principle. Meekness is a fundamental quality for any type of leadership role in the church, whether that be fathers, whether that be elders, whether that be deacons, whatever it might be. It is fundamental because when you're a leader, you're put into a position of power. Your authority, your opinion, whether you like it or not, means more. That's what being a leader is about. People follow, people look to you, and they want your opinion and they want your guidance. It is very easy as a leader to abuse that. It is very easy as a leader to want things to go your way, and so at everyone else's expense, you make something happen because you had the power to do so. Leaders need meekness. You need to lift up the flock sometimes at the expense of yourself. It's not true just for leaders. We all need to do this. We all need to exhibit meekness. But if you want to have an effective leadership at any congregation, these leaders need to be characterized by their meekness, by their willingness to sacrifice self for the benefit of others. And so if we're in any sort of leadership position in any way, ask yourself, am I a meek person? Husbands, am I being meek? God has instituted a system of authority. Do we abuse that? Are we exhibiting meekness? Church leaders, God has instituted a system of authority. Do we abuse that? Are we exhibiting meekness? We all need to reflect and self-analyze and ask, am I a meek person? If not, that's okay. It's time to reflect and it's time to repent. Are we exhibiting meekness? This isn't just an expectation. This is a command. In fact, this is something that Jesus exhibited. Jesus was meek. Matthew 11:29, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle, same word for meek and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. In fact, Jesus gave the greatest example of meekness than the world has ever known. When Jesus went to the cross to be crucified, Matthew tells us that he could have called legions of angels. Jesus could have called legions of angels to deliver himself. If you read through the Old Testament just a little bit, angels were powerful. Angels mess people up. And Jesus was going to call a legion of them. You know what Jesus could have done with a legion of angels? He certainly wouldn't have had to be crucified. But he chose not to. Because he was meek. He sacrificed self for the betterment of others. The perfect example of meekness. Moving on. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Well, I think the first question we have to answer here before we talk about what hungering and thirsting would even mean is, what is righteousness? Well, I think in simple terms, righteousness is rightness with God. That's an easy way for me to remember it. But specifically, it's rightness in our nature, it's rightness in our attitude, it's rightness in our action, and it's rightness in our word. That's what righteousness is. And we need to be hungering and thirsting after it. Jesus was a masterful teacher. And I don't think there's any other more relatable feeling than being hungry or being thirsty. If you are really thirsty, if you're on the treadmill per se, going at about 6.2 with 4% incline, you can't think about anything but water. You can't think about anything but how badly you want to drink. If you're hiking and you've ran out of water and it's a hot summer day, man, you can't think about anything but how good water would be for you right now. Same thing with you're hungry. Maybe you fasted before. When you get like a day into your fast, you are hungry. You are hungry. You can't think about anything but how good things look. In fact, you look at food that you never thought would be good, and it looks good to you. That's what hungering is. We're supposed to be like that with righteousness. We're supposed to be like that with rightness with God. We want to talk about other great leadership qualities. Hungering and thirsting for righteousness. Hungering and thirsting to be more like God. If we're in a position and we always consider what is the godly decision here, what is the godly thing to do, we will make the right choice. When we start thinking about, oh man, what makes the most sense to me? What would I do? In my situation, with my morals, with the things I've gone through in my life, what would I do? That's not the right way to think about that. The right way to think about things is what would God do? What is the godly decision? What decision would Jesus have made? That's hungering and thirsting for righteousness. When it's always on the forefront of your mind. When it's something that you think about all the time. It's kind of the same idea of pray without ceasing. It doesn't mean every single second of your life you're thinking, okay, what verse can I apply to this? What verse can I apply to this? But it means the general principle of your life is to think like God thinks, to live like God would expect us to live, to be Christ-like. That's what hungering and thirsting for righteousness is all about. Moving on, verse 7. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. What is mercy, first of all? Mercy is not giving someone something they deserve, typically a punishment. Not punishing somebody for something that they deserve. And guess what? We love to talk about mercy. When we're talking about ourselves, we love to talk about mercy. Please be merciful on me. When we make a mistake, the first thing that we think about is, man, I really hope so-and-so will be merciful with me. But what is it like when the shoe's on the other foot? I think a lot of the times when it's not about us and it's about somebody else, we just throw mercy out the window. And we want justice. We want a punishment to be enacted. But that's not a very Christian attitude. We need to be merciful. Blessed are the merciful. In fact, I will go as far as to say that we have no right to not be merciful. Do we consider God's mercy in our daily lives? Think about what Jesus said on the cross in Luke 23:34. Jesus is looking at the very people that crucified him. The very people that hammered nails through his hands and through his feet, the very people that scourged him, the very people that slapped him and blasphemed him and spit upon him. And what did he say? Father, forgive them. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. Think about all the things that I just said that were done to Jesus and more. And Jesus was willing to forgive them. I think in my own life and maybe in yours, people do far less to me, and I am unwilling to be merciful. People will say something that bothers me. People will do one thing that I didn't like, and they need to be punished. That's not right. What a terrible attitude on my behalf. And what a terrible attitude I feel like we all have sometimes of not being merciful. Just like the other things we've talked about, our lives need to be characterized by mercy. We need to be willing to forgive people even when they've wronged us. We need to be willing to love people even when they don't deserve it. We need to be willing to say, yeah, that's a good person, that's a good Christian, even when they do something that maybe we personally don't like. We need to be willing to be merciful in the same way that Jesus was merciful. Blessed are the merciful. Moving on to verse 6. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the pure in heart. Did you know it's possible to do the right thing for the wrong reasons? To do the right thing for the wrong reasons. God is amazing, God is all-powerful, God is infinite, God is all-knowing, and that's a great comfort in a lot of ways. But on the other hand, God knows your heart. God knows why you do things. Blessed are the pure in heart. God doesn't just want our actions. God doesn't just want what we look like. He wants our hearts. He wants everything that we have to be given to Him. It is very possible to do the right things for the wrong reasons. Look at the Pharisees. The Pharisees are a perfect example of this to me. What was the problem with the Pharisees? Well, they were very scrupulous about keeping God's law, but they were very bad people. Look at what Jesus said when He condemned them in Matthew 23:27. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are like whitewashed tombs, which indeed appear beautiful outwardly, but inside are full of dead men's bones. Dead men's bones and all uncleanness. This is a very vague and this is a very broad question, but let me ask you something. Why are you a Christian? What keeps you in the church? What motivates you? Is it because it's something that your family has always done? Is it something that your wife or your husband expects from you? Do you like the social aspect of it? So on and so forth. Or do you do it because you love God? Are you a Christian because you love God? You realize that Jesus Christ came to this earth from heaven, chose to do so, and died for you? And this is the least we could do? What are your intentions? Why do you do what you do? God cares about intentions. God cares about the why, not just the what. We need to make sure that our hearts are in the right place, that God has our hearts, our minds, our soul, and all of our strength. Blessed are the pure in heart. Verse 9, blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Here's the thing about peace. Peace doesn't just happen by chance. There's never been peace that just happened because somebody got lucky. Peace is something that is made. And that means it's difficult. But here's the deal. Being a peacemaker is not an option. If we go and we read from Hebrews 12, the Hebrew writer says, pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. It is not just a recommendation, it is a requirement for us to be peacemakers. Why do I want to emphasize this so much? Because it's hard. Being a peacemaker is hard. Why is it hard? Because when somebody raises your voice at you, or when someone raises their voice at you, you just need to sit there calmly, bite your tongue, smile, and nod. That's difficult. Being a peacemaker is hard because somebody's going to say something very rude and very discouraging to you, and the answer is not to say something very rude and even more discouraging back. The answer is to de-escalate the situation. Keeping peace is difficult because it requires restraint. It requires self-control, but we have an obligation to do so. And truthfully, the church is never going to truly grow if we cannot be at peace and love one another. We need to be characterized by our peace, by our commitment to peace and to unity. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. And finally, verse 10. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That's a difficult verse for me. In the New Testament, the rest of it doesn't make it easier. Paul says to Timothy in 2 Timothy 3:12, yes, and all who desire to live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution. That's a difficult pill for me to swallow. But I also think it's a good litmus test, if you will. If we are truly living the Christian life, like we talked about at the beginning, when people are from a certain country, you can tell. When we're Christians, people can tell. And guess what? Some people will not like it. Some people in the world will not like that you're a Christian. And you know, we're not going to be persecuted like some of the saints of days gone by that we read about. But there's still persecution that we suffer in our own right in America. I don't want to compare that and say that those are the same. But people will say things that are discouraging. People who don't understand will make fun. People who don't understand will think that you're ridiculous for doing that, following some fabled book that's 2,000 years old that nobody believes anymore and doesn't even fit our culture. sift through that, dig deeper, and realize that when people persecute you, all it means is that you're living the Christian life. All it means is that you're doing the right thing. And I understand that's a challenging and that's a difficult perspective. It's really hard to look at negative things in your life and think, oh, this is positive. But let it be encouraging. Know that when you are persecuted, when people speak down to you, when they step on you, when they trample you, when they make you feel like you're doing the wrong thing, know that God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, they're looking down. Guess what? They're happy and they're proud of you. That's a comforting thought to me. For Jesus to look down and to be proud. To look down and think, that one is blessed. I long for that. And I hope I live up to that standard. And I hope that we all do. A quick recap. I hope that we can take these things, and maybe you see something here on this list that you aren't the best at. Maybe you're not as merciful as you wish you could be. Maybe you're not as meek as you wish you could be. Maybe you haven't made peace like you wish you could. I know there's something on here that some of us struggle with. So I challenge you, wake up in the morning, and before you start your day, look at the Beatitudes, read through them. It'll take you 1 minute. And point at something and apply it to your week. Think, how can I be a better peacemaker? How can I be purer in heart? How can I be more merciful? How can I hunger and thirst for righteousness more so than I have in the past? That's my challenge. That's my admonition to each and every one of you. Take these things. Take the Beatitudes. Take these beautiful attitudes that will make us blessed and will make us happy, and apply them. And watch the quality of your Christian life and the quality and strength of your faith increase.